Pirates, cannons, open water, co-op battles to the death. This was what Blackwake was all about. God damn, did this game look beautiful at the time, and I mean, it still does. Massfire Studios were fresh-faced on the block back in the mid-2010s. They had been inspired by this new revolution of team-based battle games like Guns of Icarus to create something unique. Take to the high seas with crew, musket, and parrot to become the proudest of pirates, and thus Blackwake was born. In August of 2015, the game was displayed front and center on some of the biggest YouTubers' pages. Soviet Womble, Frankie on PC, playing the game and showing off to the masses. Tons of fun, tons of action, and an incredibly positive response ensued. Early versions were introduced, yet it wasn't until 2017 that the game got its proper early access release. Upon this release, it had great reception, reaching over 6,000 concurrent players on Steam, which for a unique and small indie game wasn't anything to be scoffed at. Especially with such small amounts of players required for a full game within Blackwake, it was more than enough for anyone to get stuck in with such an experience. Of course, it wasn't long though before player numbers started to drop. The initial hype, as always, died down, and it was up to the actual quality of the title itself to determine whether people would want to carry on playing. Yet even in the next few years, a few hundred players concurrently still played the game, and it was more than enough to get a good server running. There was then a full release in 2020 which helped spike the numbers somewhat, but once again, they dropped and they dropped until they hit rock bottom. Whilst there's still a tiny core of players still going into action as a pirate of the seas, most of it, if not all of the player base, has gone and have moved on from the title. Was it inevitable? Could it have been prevented? Either way, Blackwake never recovered and set itself aside into that graveyard of Steam titles. This is the day Blackwake died. There's nothing quite like a good pirate game, right? I mean, even a disaster of a launch like Sea of Thieves still had so many people defending it and enjoying it. I mean, it didn't matter that this overhyped game had little to no content after the first few hours, just giving players the opportunity to sail a ship with their brothers and sisters in an open world setting was enough to keep people interested until the devs turned things around and made a solid title out of the IP. Blackwake had that same potential, but the content just wasn't there at the start and it never really came. It was a game about taking on other ships, manned by real players, and that was about it. They added in landing opportunities later on, giving players the ability to find treasure off their naval vessel, but it didn't stretch all that much more than what it started with. So yes, it did start to bleed players because of this lack of content. Yet it gets more interesting than that. The game, at least to start with, was a one-man team. There was a vision that supposedly was complete, without any wish to expand it into much more than what we were given. There was also something to be said about a game relying on its players for content. Blackwake never really worked as a single-player experience, not even a solo experience within the multiplayer servers. What I mean by this is that even if you loaded into a multiplayer game on your own, it would never really work out unless you were prepared to join in with the other crew members, communicate through chats in the game or Discord and third-party content. Playing as a one-man team, doing your own thing with separate crew members running around the same ship yet with no organization was never going to make for a successful time in the game, leading to a lack of enjoyment and therefore bleeding its player base. But this was also flipped on its head. There was nothing better than loading into that perfect game where you had a fantastic captain barking orders, steering the ship and having crew members listen and working together, climbing the rigging, loading the correct cannons and firing on command at the perfect moment in the most precise of ways, seeing your cannonballs cascade through the air before crushing into the enemy decks, wood splinter flying everywhere, shrapnel hitting into your foes as they scream and jump overboard. It was a fantastic experience when it got it right. This double-edged sword effect has been noted in so many titles much like Blackwake, having some of the biggest highs as player interaction is key to create a fun experience, yet relying so much on the same players that as soon as someone decides to give up working together or your squad wasn't full or the server stopped being populated, those same highs flipped on their head for the lowest of lows. But was there any hope for Blackwake? Well, as I mentioned, the developer didn't have any big intentions to drive for a wider pirating experience, which is fine, I guess. They kind of had the idea and that was it. Nothing more, nothing less. Creating a fun multiplayer instant action kind of thing, loading in with your friends and manning the cannons, shooting other ships and then heading off to go and do other things was what the developer intended, and I guess if that was all they wanted, they kind of accomplished that. However, they left development. Development completely ceased, and you see it in the reviews. People really love the game. It still has mostly positive on Steam because the actual mechanics and the actual unique nature of Blackwake was great and widely received in a positive light. Yet because of the abandonment of its development and the lack of full servers now, people are struggling to recommend it, saying how they love the game, but you probably shouldn't waste your time on it. And there are very little remedies and solutions to something like this. After the solo dev left development, it seemed like the one big thing the fan base was shouting about was how it was this fantastic opportunity and an experience at the start. All the memories of that initial launch, but now there was not quite enough people to try and replicate those great experiences. One option to try and remedy this is to make the game free, I guess. It would bring the title back for some time, but I don't see it as a long-term solution. I don't see it keeping that player base because it never managed to do it before. That wasn't down to the pricing of the game, that was just down to the lack of content and the reliance on more and more players in order to have a fun experience. It never managed to keep players before, so making it free would be good for some time, but I don't see it keeping that player base as it never managed to previously. Moreover, there's the possibility of a return to development, probably not by the guy that started it, he doesn't seem all that bothered anymore by it, but maybe someone else to carry on the torch. Yet it kind of seems like a lost cause now. I would love to get in contact with the developer and maybe even have a chat about Blackwake, what their intentions were and how they felt it was received and what they plan to do now. It probably wouldn't be financially viable for someone else to take up the torch and go on the reign of continuing development for Blackwake because all the people that would have bought it probably already have it. It seems like it is truly the end of the road for Blackwake. A fantastic, unique experience, but something that wasn't quite enough to carry on for a longer future. But it brings back that question, does it have to? Did it achieve what a one-man indie title should have achieved? And I think the answer is yes, it probably did. Sometimes games aren't meant to last forever. Sometimes they're a passion project, and sometimes they're just an experiment. And it seems like Blackwake was just that for its solo developer. A flash in the pan, a brilliant initial launch, but now, well, now it seems to have sailed off back into the sunset.